Hey everyone, welcome back to Valorem Visions episode 8. I'm Andrew Brower, and today we're talking about something that every data team struggles with, data ingestion and transformation. We're not talking about the flashy dashboards or AI models. We're actually talking about the hard part of landing data and getting it ready for analytics. If you're working with Databricks, you know this hasn't always been simple, but today we're going to talk about Lakeflow Connect and Lakeflow Designer, which are changing that flow in a big way. So today we brought on Darshan, who is our senior data architect for our data and AI team, who has helped us achieve our elite Databricks partner recognition. Thanks for being here, Darshan.
Thanks for having me. It's an exciting shift for Databricks.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, so I am the data architect over here at Valorem, and primarily my job is to kind of identify, the customer's current existing system, what they're using, how it's built. In a lot of cases, it's legacy systems or something they've built on, a different cloud that needs migrating, or it's building an entire new system that creates a data ecosystem for them, right? A 360 picture of how things get ingested from all their different siloed businesses where they're using Excel and stuff like that to do their transformations and build their reports. So that's where I come in. I identify what they are doing with their data, what sort of transformations are happening, what sort of tooling they're using at the moment, and then based on that, help them build out data lakehouses and medallion architectures within Databricks or Fabric. We're partners for both of them. And the use case depends specifically on the customer, right? If it's a smaller use case,
Absolutely.
They need to get up and running quickly, then we would ideally go for Fabric. Whereas if it's a bigger use case where they require a lot of power, a lot of compliance, data governance, all of that, we typically tend to go towards Databricks for the unified governance model they offer. And that's where kind of the Lakeflow Connect and Lakeflow Designer for me are big pieces, because before, historically, you would have to use some sort of data factory, or if you wanted to use out of the box tools or write your custom notebooks to ingest from these different data sources. Whereas now with Lakeflow Connect and Lakeflow Designer, the whole picture, the whole flow changes drastically.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think we've seen a tremendous uptick as many of our conversations go with AI changing the whole landscape, because everybody needs to get their data in a good place and operational, right? So
yeah.
Let's you did a good intro there. Appreciate that. Let's dive into the Valorem Visions board. So a fun event that we do with all our guests coming in, that basically I'm going to have you bring up a whiteboard and we'll give you a minute to articulate, kind of draw out on the whiteboard what we're going to do today, kind of introducing the topic in a graphical way. So why don't you go ahead and bring that up and we'll get the timer started. Yeah, go ahead. We'll start the timer.
Okay, so let's talk about kind of a typical, medallion architecture, right? Like, what do you do when you want to create a medallion architecture within Databricks? So you would have your kind of ingestion sources, and these can be different things. Could be SQL Server, could be, a different S3 bucket, ADLS.
Sure.
Multiple different things.
Documents, whatever.
Yeah. SFTP servers, all sorts of stuff, right? Then comes your kind of raw layer, right? This is where you read the data from the ingestion sources, land it into raw.
Also known as the bronze layer. Yes.
Well, if you're landing sources from external providers, it's typically better to land them into raw.
Okay.
And then use your bronze layer to kind of structure that data, right? Because you're not always going to be
makes sense.
Getting structured data. You can get JSONs, you can get parquets, all sorts of stuff. So typically going from raw to bronze is where you kind of structure your data. And this is basically transforming your nested JSONs and all of that stuff into a columnar storage, write it into either a Delta table, or you can keep it as a file, a Delta file. The reason for using Delta files is it's inherently 20 times faster than any other thing that you can use on Databricks. So it kind of helps accelerate some of those workloads. historically, if you're processing big files, a lot of the processing is used when reading and writing stuff. So, if you can cut that down by 20%, that's giving you a lot of, extra performance, extra juice for your pipelines. Now, going into kind of bronze to silver side of things, right? That's where you do your data validations, your data type changes. If something is a date format, but it's marked as a string, it needs to be the specific format. That sort of stuff. That's the kind of things that you do within your silver layer, right? And then from the silver layer, you would also have stuff like checking if your primary keys are nulls, because those are kind of your key elements that your reports are going to use down the line, that your joins are going to use when you go into your gold layers, right? So going from silver to gold is where you would have your data models, your dimensional models, data vaults with marks on top. There's different things. It depends from use case to use case. So what we're going to talk about today is where Lakeflow Connect and Lakeflow Designer fit into all of this. But before we do that, kind of wanted to just take a few minutes to, describe, hey, this is what the current flow of data would be. So your ingestion sources currently, as it stands, you would be using Data Factory, or you would be using something like a notebook to kind of write custom code to do the ingestions here.
Yep.
Going from silver to gold is various different options here, right? There is Lakeflow itself, which is previously declarative pipelines that you can use to write, SQL code to basically have your views go from silver to gold and convert that into your data models. So that's kind of the current flow of things. Is you would write a notebook to do your ingestion sources, then you would have the raw to silver layer, which is usually config driven, right? So this is kind of automated. Sure. You don't want to have to make changes here. Every single time you have, a new data source. Let's say, for example, I was ingesting from a SQL server. I have the connector built in. All I need to do is go into my configuration and say, hey, I'm ingesting from SQL Server, but here is the new address. Here is the kind of user password. Connect to it, pull my data, and then you provide it with, hey, here is my, here's what my silver layer looks like, right? What's the data types, what's my primary keys, also all of that stuff. So it will basically take your data as it stands. Once you've built out this integration layer, as in the ingestion, your configuration pipeline can then take the data from start to finish, ingest the data into silver, which only leaves the gold bit, which is, your data analysts coming in and writing out your SQL views, or them coming in and writing out stuff on top of your gold data model that's pre-existing. So this is where Lakeflow and Lakeflow Connect and Designer kind of fit in, right? So Lakeflow Connect essentially allows you to build out your ingestion fairly quickly using just, clicks. You can do a couple of clicks. You can give it your, hey, here is my SQL server. Here is the kind of details for it. Ingest the data, land it into Delta table, right? Could be the same with SFTP. You read it from SFTP, you land that data into your bronze layer instantly. So you skip. With Lakeflow Connect, you essentially skip these two first pieces where you don't have to worry about ingesting your data and kind of transforming it into a kind of bronze structure. You essentially have your sources directly landing into bronze, and then your pipelines can take care of how does bronze to silver do that. How does data validation and everything happens, because this is, in most cases, the bronze to silver is what's going to be uniform. Where you're going to require effort once you've built your initial framework is kind of building out the ingestion sources and the transformations for them. So bringing in Lakeflow Connect here essentially allows you to bypass some of the steps that your data engineers will have to do on a day-to-day, coming in and saying, hey, today I'm ingesting from, SFTP. And historically, we've been ingesting from S3 buckets, ADLS, SQL servers. I need to then go and build that SFTP integration, make sure that it's working, it's tested, pulls the data, right? Whereas with Lakeflow Connect, you can just click, hey, I'm connecting to SFTP, drop those files, and then your pipelines can kind of trigger off and handle your data validations and everything from there.
Makes sense. So
yeah.
really you're, getting back, taking a step back is, the existence of these Lakeflow connector and designer is attempting to solve the issue where historically getting data has not been easy into Databricks. So having to rely on notebooks and maintaining those external tools like Data Factory, et cetera, wasn't really a simple native way inside of Databricks to kind of stay in a central platform, right? So even though Databricks was strong on the analytics and engineering side, the onboarding was still tough because it required extra tools and in steps. So as you were kind of getting into Lakeflow Connect and Lakeflow Designer, they're coming in. So can you dive into kind of these public preview? I think one's in public preview and one's in private preview, right?
Yeah. So Lakeflow Connect is currently in public preview. So if you go to your Databricks workspace right now, go over to previews, you can enable it. You can enable the connectors that it's currently offering out of the box. Experiment with it, play around with it, kind of get a sense of how it works, how you can load data. And then Lakeflow Designer, which is currently in private preview, that will require, either a Databricks contact or you being a Databricks partner to kind of request some of that. You might have to open a support ticket for it. But Lakeflow Designer is essentially your call it Azure Data Factory data flows, right? Where it's drag and drop. You can take a table, you can take 3 tables, transform it into a single table, call it your fact table or your dimension tables, or create data vault using those. That's where I see Lakeflow Designer kind of fitting into this, not doing your day-to-day validations or your day-to-day checks, but more so once you have your data in Silver, it's cleansed, it's ready to go, it's standardized to what your company expects. You would then flow into, hey, how do I now make this data usable, right, for my Power BI reports and stuff, right? And this is where typically analysts and data engineers would work together to identify, hey, like, what does my end state data model looks like? A data engineer comes in, kind of builds out that data model, right? Whereas now with Lakeflow Designer, your engineers can more focus on the important pieces, which is how do we land data into Silver and how do we make sure that data is clean and standardized to your company standards? Doing stuff like, hey, if a country is listed down as US, United States, and America, what's the standard naming convention for it, right? United States of America. It will transform it to that. So that, when you go and click in your report, you can see all the different countries. You can see all your different cities, everything standardized.
Yeah.
So putting Lakeflow Designer where you would normally be developing your gold plus, platinum layers, right? This allows you to accelerate that workflow where your analysts and data engineers kind of have to work together because, the analysts best know the data, whereas the engineers know where the data comes from and where to land it. Whereas with Lakeflow Designer, if you offer them your Silver layer saying, hey, this is clean, in standardized data, from there, they can take that data. They know how to calculate their different, business use cases, right? Like profit loss margins and all of those things from your standard data source. They can use that. They can use Lakeflow Designer to build out the gold layer. And now typically, if you wanted to do this, right, if you wanted to have this workflow, you would basically doing enter data factory, right? Bring in your data into Databricks. Then you do your processing, land the data, and then you go back into Data Factory if you wanted to use, your data flows to do the drag and drops, right? Whereas now
Which
it's
makes
all
sense,
kind
right?
of,
Which is nice to have kind of a centralized platform where everybody can work in kind of a standardized way, right? And not bringing in external tools. I know as a developer and engineer, I love when I don't have to move around to many different places to go accomplish what I'm trying to do. So eliminating
Exactly.
those minutia, I will say, of having to go out and in and back in and have specialized people that know how to do these individual things. I would imagine that it accelerates data processing and organizing data for people as well.
Yeah, exactly. The main goal is reducing the complexity, having, 5 different tools that you use throughout your day-to-day pipeline and having it all consolidated in one place, right? That's kind of the idea behind Lakehouse architecture is you build your pipelines, you build out your ETLs, and you have your governance, your data cataloging, your data lineage all offered in one place, right? Where lineage and cataloging with Databricks, it kind of comes out of the box, right? You just need to make sure that you tag your data appropriately, that you're setting up, appropriate roles and permissions, um, and the rest of it, like the lineage and stuff. As you build your pipelines, Databricks is smart enough to kind of recognize it, like, hey, if I have this gold table, I know that this is coming from this particular bronze table all the way back. Um, it's able to kind of do that, right? And because now you've kept everything within Databricks, you can expand on it where it knows where you ingested the data from, where it landed, and then all the way down to gold.
Makes sense. So looking at this, is there a difference between like a Lakeflow pipeline and what a traditional like Databricks DLT pipeline is?
No, Lakeflow is essentially DLT pipelines, just under a new name to kind of put all of these different elements together, right? Like Connect and Designer and another thing which is Lakeflow Editor, which allows you to basically write. If you have something more of a complex scenario, right, you would basically be writing your own code for it. From going from silver to gold, you can basically declare validations and stuff if there needs to be. And it kind of gives you a visual overview, right? The editor gives you a visual overview as you're writing your code, whereas Designer allows you to build those particular each small segments, and it will have a set of elements that you can build against, right? Transpose it this way, or uh, add 1 and 2 together, that sort of thing. So you will have the basics of the basics which are needed for your day to day. And then if you need to do something complex, then you have you still have your Lakeflow, or call it declarative pipelines, right? That where you can write SQL code and have it generate a kind of visual flow of where your data comes from, where does it land.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So really now with these new flows, ingestion, transformation, orchestration are all happening natively. How is this changing team dynamics?
Yeah. So, it massively changes how your team works, right? Now you can have your engineers more focused on building the robust pipelines, making sure everything's running accurately, making sure that all the data that you have within your server layers, right, is to the standard that your company expects, rather than building out, using your day-to-day manual of, hey, I want to ingest from this new source, or I want to add this one table that the analysts are looking for. We can now have the analysts come in and say, hey, here is your silver layer, right? You have access to all of this. You know how to go from this silver layer to the gold layer. And here is a tool that can do just that, which is Lakeflow Designer, right? Go build it. And they can very easily, without having to bring in engineers, go in and build a flow and the data into that new table, and all of a sudden use it in the reports, right? It massively accelerates that.
That's awesome, because I think oftentimes when I've been in large projects that have had a large data platform initiative, you hear that struggle between data engineer and analysts. And I need this. Data engineers, it's somewhere in a backlog, but the analysts are like, I need to write a report, get it ready, organize that data. So it's really breaking down that silo between those to now they can operate independently and still flow efficiently without really one blocking or stepping on someone's toes during
Yep,
that process.
exactly. And the small changes, the amount of time it would normally take for your minute change of, hey, actually this column name needs to be changed to this, or this actually needs to be multiplied by 100, right? All of those simple day-to-day tasks can be accelerated from, your analyst makes the request, data engineering team picks it up, they work on it, they deploy those changes. Whereas now the analyst can come in and he's like, hey, this is what I'm going to change. I'm going to test it in dev. I want to make sure everything's okay, and then flow them through your different environments, right? Because they know what the correct looks like when they building out reports, when they are creating, their
Sure.
dimensional models.
Which is even more important, as we kind of referenced in the beginning, right? Is all these companies are restructuring for AI and whatever level that they're using it in. And so with that, you have those efficiencies in AI and LLMs that not only that, but people in having AI built into BI tools like Power BI, right? Where anybody can create reports and do these things, which means there's an even more dependence on having this data in your silver, more than likely your gold layers, that is just ready to be consumed. And so even though the silos between engineer and analysts have been there, the downstream effects are also getting unlocked, because with those, you're opening up the floodgates for everybody else to actually utilize the data and build reports and visuals, build models for AI, etc.
Yep, exactly. And Lakeflow Designer and Lakeflow Editor will have Genie built in, where you can ask it to kind of, in words, just say, hey, build me this, right? And it will give you a template where you don't have to write your code from start to beginning. You can just say, hey, I want to join my company and my product together using my company ID, right? And it can basically go in, look at your tags, if you've tagged again, tagging is kind of the key when you're trying to use different AI spaces, right? Or AI agents, is if you've tagged everything properly, you can just say, hey, join my company and product together, or say, hey, how many products has my company sold within the past X years, right? It knows what timestamp columns to look at, and build those. And you can basically just type it out and have it built, right? Rather than having to write the SQL joins and everything yourself, which it saves minutes, but those minutes add up over the duration of a project.
Those minutes are important when your C-level suite is asking for insights, right?
Exactly.
And you're like crunching through a SQL table versus just asking, and with this process being able to efficiently pull that data out fast and be able to do that. So data flow, ingestion, transformation is all great, right? As maybe we speak to another side of the business, is oftentimes there is a big conversation of data governance, data security, all of these bigger topics of how do we manage that. Can you talk a little bit about how this unified platform handles governance?
Yeah. So, talking about kind of the governance side of things, right? Where you would have, your typical is like, hey, I have my social security numbers, I have my phone numbers, all of that, right? Because now your data engineers are more focusing on making sure that they're tagging everything appropriately. They're building everything with, appropriate attributes in mind, right? If something's a social security number, it's marked as social security number. They can build out your kind of governance around who has access to what fields, what columns, right? And there is Databricks has attribute-based access control, where if you grant someone access to, let's say, your employee, employee attribute, all of the sudden they can see everything related to the employee, but because they don't have a HR role, they're not going to be able to see their details like salaries and all of that, right? And that's that kind of comes out of the box with Databricks with just appropriate tagging. Talking about some of the lineage, right? Lineage is extremely important for knowing where your data came from, what happened along the way, if you're seeing some issues. How your data transforms, and is it compliant, right? If I am going to go in and write something against, going back to kind of Genie, right? If I'm going to go and write something against Genie, do I have access to that, right? Like, do I have what's the maximum salary someone's being paid? A HR person can come in and ask that question, but a normal employee, if they ask that question, as long as you have the RBAC roles, the permissions, everything built in, and governed within Databricks, they won't be able to go and kind of get that information for themselves. So how does this kind of fit into the overall picture, right? Is because now you have all your things in one place, it's a lot easier for you to tag what information is what and where it's coming from. You don't have to go into SQL Server because people wanted to use SQL Server because of the constraints, right? The primary foreign key constraints, for example. Normally, you can't do that on Databricks, so people go to SQL Server for that, right? That's where kind of Lakebase, which is another thing that just came out of preview and it's GA now. And if you haven't seen our post on it on LinkedIn, we are kind of the launch partners for them. That's where Lakebase comes in, right? Bridging the gap between OLAP and OLTP, allowing you for faster read times, but as well as maintaining the compliance and the kind of constraints around your primary foreign keys, so that if you're adding something to a table, you're not violating anything that's going to be important for your Power BI reports down the line.
Oh, that's great. And it just proves Databricks moving closer to being that complete unified platform of, high performance, compliance, and analytics all in that one environment. So
Yep.
zooming out a little bit, what does this actually mean for organizations um, that may be looking to implement this?
Yeah. So, it offers it offers a couple of things, right? You centralize your ingestions, transformations, your lineage. You don't have, you reduce your reliance on using, multiple different tools to do things, right? Where you have to go into Data Factory to do things, or you might have Fivetran, right? Or snowflakes of things. Um, you can have various different things that are ingesting your data. Whereas now you can, you will obviously have your notebooks that can go and fetch the data, right? That's what you had previously, but that wasn't
Yep.
accelerated, right? Now it gives you the acceleration in terms of like out of box connectors. You have Google Ads, you have ServiceNows, you have Workday. All of those are built by Databricks. There is also a zero bus ingestion, which basically allows you to ingest from your gRPCs. Those are essentially your day-to-day web page protocols where you're making API calls and retrieving stuff, right? Those can directly be ingested into Databricks using those built-in, it's Databricks provided notebooks that work using Lakeflow Connect. But your time to kind of insight accelerates by that much more, right? Where you allow your team to function autonomously. Your engineers are basically building robust pipelines, and your data analysts are using those robust pipelines, the data landed in your silver layers of things to achieve your business outcomes, right? A lot faster than you would normally.
Yeah, and I think going back kind of on our conversation of governance a little bit and kind of that summary of basically creating that platform and those efficiencies is we all strive to reduce the amount of moving parts in a system, right? And it seems to me as we're going through this, we're kind of abstracting all of that up a layer to eliminate the individual management of pieces, which eventually can cause problems, right? And so if you're managing notebooks and something gets updated incorrectly, now your whole flow is broken. And as we talked about earlier, right, all those downstream effects that wave will cause. um, Abstracting that up a little bit in what it seems like Lakeflow Connect and Designer are trying to do is reducing those mechanisms that could fail and maximizing or minimizing the pain points in each of those areas.
Yep, exactly. And it's not just about kind of your governance and your lineage and everything, right? It's also your architectural overhead. The more tools that you're using, the more services that you're using, the more you have to manage, right? And
Absolutely.
not just manage each of the tools individually, but also the kind of networking elements between them. Because you want your data to be
That's a good
secure, you
point.
want it all to be in one place, right? You want it to be under a singular umbrella, not in 5 different places where you have to build out a virtual net and put everything, have a private endpoint connecting everything together. So this kind of helps bridge that gap that much closer.
No, I think our security and
Yeah,
infrastructure engineers would love
would
to hear that,
would
right?
love this. Yeah.
So Darshan, any closing thoughts on Lakeflow Connect or Lakeflow Designer or any of the ancillary things around that?
No, I think, it's very exciting steps over for Databricks. I'm excited to kind of get into Lakeflow Designer and have, my analysts take a look at it and kind of start building their own pipelines where I can focus on the more engineering side of things, building out,
Sure.
workflows. So yeah, it's definitely something that, is worth exploring if you haven't already. Especially Lakeflow Connect. It's available to anyone that has a Databricks workspace with, premium workspace enabled. You just go into previews and enable it. I'm sure Lakeflow Designer will be available kind of shortly for people to kind of work and experiment with.
Oh, that's great. Well, again, thanks for the great breakdown. And to everyone listening, if data ingestion has kind of been that point, I would highly recommend reaching out to Valorem Reply at our website, or you can find Darshan on LinkedIn, as he mentioned, as he posts great insights from time to time. So reach out if this is something that is affecting your organization. You want to figure out how we're thinking about it and organizing this initiative. You can, again, find us at valoremreply.com. Thank you, Darshan.
Thanks.